Look, before we get into this video, I just want to note that obviously I'm really white.
Yeah, I'm surprised that you didn't notice that before.
Those white people kind of way. Like I'm somehow detached from that. When I say white people, I mean myself included. I just don't want it to come across as like, I'm one of the good ones. Because I'm still learning how to combat racism and white supremacy myself.
It's kind of hard not to be racist when you keep changing the definition of what being a racist is.
So, I hope that makes sense. Anyway, the point of this video is that not all white people bullshit. If you don't know what I mean, let me give you an example. Let's say a person of color experiences some kind of racism from a white person. In frustration, they say, white people are horrible. At this point, you can expect some kind of white person to pop up out of the bushes and scream, not all white people, you shouldn't generalize us like that. That's reverse racism.
Reverse racism is a ridiculous term. It shouldn't be used because it's just being a racist. Anybody can be a racist no matter what race you are. If you do not like somebody because of the color of their skin, or you are expecting them to act a certain way because of the color of their skin, you're being a racist.
These white people constantly scream, not all white people, and reverse racism, argue that making a generalization about white people is just as bad as making a generalization about people of color. They think that saying white people are horrible is just as bad as saying black people are horrible.
If you want to be fair, then yes, it should be this way. If one side is saying this group of people is being horrible, and then the other people say the same thing, and the other side is being yelled at because they said it, that doesn't seem fair.
On like a total surface level, you might think, yeah, that makes sense. Those statements are both generalizations about a race. But if you look just a little bit harder at the cultural, social, political, and historical context that these phrases are said in, it's pretty easy to see that they are not equivalent statements.
Yes, what happened years and years and years ago was a terrible thing. But you can't get upset with the people that had nothing to do with it in today's era. It just doesn't make sense to get mad about something that my great-great-great-great-grandfather did and tell me that I had to fix what he did.
I mean, black people in the US were slaves, and then they were considered 3/5 of a person, and then they lived under Jim Crow segregation laws, and even today they still experience systemic racism on a daily basis. The prejudice and discrimination that was built into our institutions and systems didn't go away overnight with the Civil Rights Act of 1965. Racism, and by extension white supremacy, both still have a deep hold on this country.
You're gonna have to show proof on this. I don't really believe that our country is still deep into racism.
A person of color in the US today means to live under a system that was not only not built for you, but was built to harm you. If you don't believe that people of color are marginalized and oppressed in a way that white people are not, you're just being willfully ignorant at this point.
This is the most bullshit excuse I've ever heard. This is not true. My country, which is the United States, does not hurt somebody because of the color of their skin. They are their citizens. They're going to take care of them no matter what.
So I'm gonna assume that we can all agree on this. If we can't agree, I don't think I'm gonna be able to convince you, but there will be some links in the description if you'd like to challenge your worldview with some facts and statistics. Anyway, the point of all of this is just to give you some background for why generalizing statements about white people versus generalizing statements about black people are not equivalent. They don't exist in a vacuum. Black people in the US have been oppressed and continue to be oppressed in ways that white people will never fully be able to understand. So
this is kind of a bullshit thing to say because not only black people were abused and were slaves. Irish people were slaves. They were taken from their homes, beat, killed, raped.
when you say something in 2017, knowing everything that has happened up until now, your words live in the context of this time period, in this culture, in this political context. They can't be separated from that. So let's say you're a white person and you say, black people are horrible. In a greater context, you are a member of a group that oppressed black people for a long time and continues to do so today. I can already hear the white people chiming in saying that they weren't alive during slavery, so they shouldn't be responsible for it. And like,
wow, you actually did know what I was about to say. Well done.
Sure, you're not directly responsible for slavery, but you continue to benefit from the oppression of black people, which has had its roots in slavery. That's a fact. And I know white people get really sensitive about this, and I get it. I used to be in middle school too.
So instead of giving actual proof, you're just gonna start name calling? Okay.
And I wanted to believe that I lived in a system that was fair and equal and didn't value me over someone else just because of the color of my skin. But then I grew up and I realized that racism was still very much alive. So I'm not saying that white people need to hate themselves or have guilt over this. I just think we need to recognize our role as people who have benefited from racism and who are a part of a group that has oppressed and continues to oppress black people. And then we need to work to fight against that. And part of what that means is that when you, as a white person, say black people are horrible, your words are just perpetuating the oppression of black people that white people have been doing for a long time. You're continuing that racist cycle. You're adding fuel to the fire. On the other hand, if a black person says white people are horrible, it doesn't have that weight behind it.
But it should, because it's still being a racist thing to say. You can't say something is not racist just because it's the color of somebody's skin. That's just not fair. So he goes on and on, so I'm going to skip a few minutes just because he gives out his stupid analogy that doesn't really make sense and has nothing to do with the topic. It doesn't really work.
One of them ended up in jail. That's because you'd be ignoring the power that each person had or didn't have and the general context behind it all. That's why reverse racism isn't a thing. Because systemic racism hurts and oppresses people of color, not white people. While people can certainly be rude or prejudiced towards white people, that still doesn't mean that white people face systemic oppression in anywhere near the same way that people of color do. Okay, so context matters when it comes to generalizations, but also when white people say not all white people, they're usually taking a complaint about racism and making it about themselves. The only time I've heard generalizations from people of color about white people has been after a person of color has experienced some kind of racism. So, for example, let's say a person of color on Twitter tweets something about systemic racism. In response, they get a bunch of ignorant white people replying and calling them racial slurs and saying that racism doesn't exist. And
there might be a few people that have done that. Highly doubt that somebody who's posting about racism and saying that they don't like what this person is saying is going to cause somebody a racial slur. Doesn't really make sense, and if somebody is doing that, they're being stupid.
And all of that. In response, they say something to the effect of, I am so tired of white people. They're horrible. And that's when the not all white people crowd comes in. Some white person pops up and says, not all white people are like that. I'm one of the good ones. In this way, all that saying not all white people does is absolve that white person of any guilt and make the situation about them. Why do you have a need to insert yourself there and defend yourself? It doesn't make the situation any better. It doesn't get rid of the racist nonsense that that person has had to endure, and it doesn't challenge it either. It's just a very indifferent, don't worry, we're not all like that, which isn't too reassuring, I'd imagine, since that doesn't negate all the racist bullshit that person gets. It's just a way of making yourself feel better, and I've never seen it improve a situation or combat racism in any way. I understand that you want to defend yourself and you feel like when someone makes a comment about white people that it affects you. But the truth of the matter is that you're going to be just fine. Generalizations about white people are not going to hurt you. They're not going to contribute to unfair housing discrimination against you or lead to a racial hiring bias against you because you're white. Remember,
I guess I have my own personal story about this. I was at a food stamps place because I wasn't doing very well physically and, money-wise. So when I went to the food stamp store, I got really dirty looks just for going in there and being a white person. Now that's kind of being racist, I would say. And then when I tried to get all my applications done, I had a black man tell me, what am I doing here? I don't belong here. I have everything I need. How can you tell me that I have everything I need when you don't even know my life? Another thing I've seen is when I've seen people go in for Section 8, it's usually the black people who get it or the other races other than white. It's kind of racist to see, and to say that they're not getting that benefit is kind of ridiculous, because I live by a place that has Section 8 and it's all black people. That's not being racist, that's just how it is. That's what I see when I look at that place. And all I see is them constantly complaining about things not being right. Now this place is a very, very nice place. It shouldn't be Section 8 in my own opinion, because it just keeps getting destroyed. Well, thank you for making this video. It really had no point. It proves nothing. You keep on showing things that are just not true, but please keep making videos and I'll try to reply to them as soon as you make them.